there.
We've got everything covered here.
I know, it's fun to come back home.
Yeah. Let's do it with your hand. Gossamer, this is your vote,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, it's about that time.
Lauren, she's just a bit older than me, a year older than me, I think, and Heather comes over. He's
Yeah. He's hard to read.
What's that?
He'll leave his mark here.
Well, there is that.
Hi, I'm Jim. You as well.
I don't know.
So, ladies and gentlemen,
I get to know.
ding, 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 and school teachers. No.
Hello. Okay.
Denise has given me permission to give you a little preamble. She is going to start the meeting momentarily.
Oh, here's Michael, too.
For me, I want to take you back to your childhood when your mom said grabbing is bad. Tonight, grabbing is good. There's one microphone for every two people. If you have something salient to say, or something totally obnoxious,
Oh, that's a high threshold. Michael.
That is my pressure.
grab the microphone from your partner who's doing do-si-dos with you. And the other thing is, from microphone technique, people have explosive P's and T's and things like that. They have a lot of energy. Don't speak directly into a microphone, these or any other. Pop it right over here, you'll be fine. Let's go solve the world's problems.
I don't think, whoops, sorry. I just sort of,
Staying in the share position.
I'm leaving it out. I might play solitaire.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Am I on?
I don't think so.
Doesn't sound, can you all hear me? I guess that's what.
And the other thing is, we're not running the speakers tonight.
Oh, okay.
All these microphones open.
Okay, so as long as everyone can,
Give me 10 inches away from that. I've been meaning to say that tell you that.
don't grab too much.
Yeah.
How's that?
Thank you.
Okay. So I'll call the Select Board Workshop on Workforce Housing to order, September 25th, 2023, 6 p.m. Hello and welcome to everyone here tonight. I'm just going to make an opening statement and then move on with all the important people who are here. It's hard to read or listen to the news these days without hearing stories about the housing challenges our country faces. This is particularly true in a summer home and vacation community like Rockport, where vacation rentals are attractive investment options. That drives up home values, which can be good news if you already own a home, but has a significant downside when it comes to being able to offer housing to the very folks that work here and are essential to our quality of life and sense of community. We in Midcoast, Maine are acutely aware of the lack of affordable workforce housing. We have all heard stories of good potential employees who turned down job offers because they couldn't find housing, grown children who can't afford to live and work where they grew up, worries that we are losing our young families who are the bedrock of a community's vibrant future. While the town can't solve this problem on its own, we can listen and learn about the scope of the problem from our employers, the issues and impediments to developing workforce housing in Rockport, the potential solutions that the town can lead on, and provide a forum for those working on this difficult issue to learn about what each other is doing, help foster the networking and brainstorming that are already taking place, and work together to begin the hard work of developing workforce housing in Rockport. We've asked each of our participants to limit their presentation time so that we can be done by 7:30. But we also know this is just the beginning of important discussions that will continue after this workshop. We're going to start with the Economic Development Committee. Then we'll hear from a few of our key employers. Next, we'll hear about some housing projects that are in the early development stages. After that, the Midcoast Regional Housing Trust will educate us on the important role that a housing trust plays in workforce housing. The Lesher Family Foundation will speak about their commitment to facilitate development of workforce housing. And then our town planner, Orion Thomas, will update us on what the town is doing and can do to address some of the impediments to workforce housing development. Because this is a workshop, there will be no public comment, but that's not because we don't want to hear from you, and would encourage you to reach out to any of us, Orion or John Duke, with thoughts or ideas on this subject. Let's start with Deborah Hall, Chair of our Economic Development Committee.
Thanks, Denise, and good afternoon, good evening, I guess, everyone. So I have some of my EDC members here to help me out, but I wanted to just say that in the last few years, the Economic Development Committee has been in existence. In fact, we formed it when I was on the select board. And, I think it's a very important committee potentially for the town. We have been discussing over the last few years topics relating to our mission, which I'm going to read it, is to advise and assist the select board in promoting and facilitating responsible and properly planned commercial and industrial growth within the community in order to expand and strengthen the local economy and diversify the community's tax base and to give the town's residents more opportunities to live, work, and thrive. So time and again in our discussions, the topic always returns to workforce housing, as I think we've all realized that the bottom line is you can't create or sustain economic development without workforce housing. For a while, we have certainly put together outlines of what we think are elements of economic development, and again, workforce housing plays a very important role in that, along with other topics. The RES property, as you know, we took a good look at possibly using that property for some workforce housing, but it just wasn't, at the end of the day, the right property. But it didn't in any way dampen our enthusiasm as a committee in trying to find the right mix, the right location for workforce housing. We recently had a workshop, I don't remember the day, but it was a few weeks ago. And we had a number of participants in that workshop that we had invited. Of course, it was open to the public, but we had certain invited guests, and a lot of those guests are here around the table tonight. And I think it was a very productive session. It was eye-opening for us in a number of ways. There were good suggestions that came out of that particular workshop that we would like to pursue as a committee, and we reported on it to the select board. There were things that we learned, such as the fact that when you're talking about workforce housing, you're not necessarily talking about just workforce housing. There's the concept that a number of people in this constrained housing market that we have now, that people will buy something that's smaller than what they want ultimately, and if something becomes available, they will move to that larger residence, thereby freeing up what would be workforce housing for somebody else. I had never thought about it in that way. We've also talked about how, the infilling of workforce housing into communities, existing communities, not just necessarily having this pocket of workforce housing. Seeing pockets reminds me of pocket neighborhoods, where, we talked a lot about looking at things that have been done elsewhere that have worked, and pocket neighborhoods are something that I think is really a quite interesting concept. We obviously want to work with developers and others who see the obstacles. We want to learn what the obstacles are to achieving more workforce housing in Rockport, and work with the select board and the ORC and so forth to try to help recommend the removal of those obstacles. So we were really quite encouraged and quite informed about, from that meeting. And I hope that some of those other, I could talk for a lot longer than 10 minutes, so I won't. I hope that a lot of those other topics will come up tonight.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Next, we'll hear from some of our employers. First of all, we'll start with Maria Libby, who's superintendent of our school districts.
I don't have a lot to add. I will say that we certainly are facing the repercussions of the difficulty of finding housing for staff. Typically, it's teachers and administrators who are moving to this area in order to work in our school system. A lot of the support staff are hired locally. They're not moving to come and take those positions. But we have had a fair amount of difficulty. The people who we've hired have had a fair amount of difficulty trying to find housing. This year, one of our teachers at the elementary school contacted us in August saying, I think I just need to let you know we're not going to be able to take this job. I need to let you know in enough time to try to hire somebody else because we have been looking for 5 months and we cannot find a house to live in. And we had a rapid response to that and sent something out to the entire community. Some of you might be parents at the elementary school who were the recipients of the email we sent. And we did find housing for that person by tapping into the parent community and any resources that they had. So they found something at the last minute. But the new staff for the past couple of years in particular have talked about the fact that that is their topic of conversation when they all meet up, when the school year starts, is how each of them found housing and where they found housing. So it's a real challenge. And, somebody had mentioned just about sustainability. I also think about it in terms of people's ability to move here and live here, particularly those with young children who tend to have lower incomes than when they're older. And in general, I've been in the district for quite a long time. I'm in my 9th year as superintendent. In general, our incoming kindergarten class is 65 to 72 students from Camden and Rockport. This year, it's 43. And I feel that we're beginning to see the signs of the difficulty of finding housing in this area. And I'm really curious to see what our incoming kindergarten class will be next year. If it's as low as that, I feel like we're in trouble as a community if that's what we're seeing, because that is a significant decrease. And that just has broad implications for our community, the vitality of the communities. So it's having an impact in multiple ways.
Maisie?
What was the price range that they were looking for that they couldn't find? Was it no housing, or was it within a certain price range?
No, their price range was up to $3,000 a month. They felt like they could afford, and they literally they couldn't find anything. So it wasn't about the money in their particular case.
That would be to rent or to pay off a mortgage?
To rent.
To rent.
Yeah, they just wanted to get into something. They were moving here from Texas, had literally packed up their house, had sold their house in Texas, packed everything up, and hit the road in July, and went to visit family on their way here, and the whole time that they looked, and they had packed up all of their belongings. And she was kind of at the breaking point. She's like, if I don't find a house, she contacted me like on whatever, July 30th or something, and said, if I don't have a house by August 2nd, we're pulling the plug. Wow. And it was like 3 more days, because they had been looking for quite a long time. And, I think that they were facing a number of challenges, but one of them being how tight the market is, that when it's like a house, when something becomes available, there are 10 people scrambling to get that particular rental. And things just kept falling through, or they couldn't find something. We had put out a lot to assist this family. And then when they said that, we sent something out to the whole community at the elementary school. And so she did find something, but, it didn't surprise me that we were potentially facing that as a situation. And I expect that to be a situation that we face, that we cannot hire teachers because people can't live anywhere close. You know, and I know they were looking in Rockland, Union, and, you know, it's another, for a lot of people, another issue that they face is that many people who are coming to teach here want to be in Camden or Rockport so that their children can go to our school system. So, I mean, that's just another factor, and I can tell you, as superintendent, like, I'm considering, well, we may have to grant superintendent agreements to these people if they cannot find housing in our towns, and they can't come. And, you know, we've been very restrictive in our willingness to accept superintendent agreements, which are students from other towns who want to attend our school system. And there really has to be a good reason. A lot of surrounding towns much more freely allow that to happen. And we can't, because if I allowed, you know, somebody to come from a neighboring district just because they thought our school was better, I would have a flood of 300 people asking for the same reason. So, I mean, our school system is really strong, and there is a high demand to be here. So it complicates it because people want to be in either Camden or Rockport as well. So it's a challenge.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Maria, and I think that,
Have to expand the town. Set the perimeter of the town around Hope and,
right, well, that won't be a problem. Anyway, thank you, and that's important, hearing about the kindergarten enrollment, because that is, and in many communities, has been a harbinger of, okay, this is where,
and the drop from 65 to 45, is that, I mean, is there
43.
fluctuation over every years? Is this a?
Not that
all
kind of
sudden a
fluctuation.
straight
I mean, it's-
down dive here?
Yeah, it's ironic, because our high school population is at an all-time high right now. We're at 750 students, which is higher than we've ever been. We were at 719 last year. And, you know, our high school population has been bolstered because St. George withdrew from RSU 13. And now we have 63 students at our high school from St. George who pay tuition. The town pays tuition because they don't have a high school, so they get school choice. And most of their students, 80 to 90% of them, choose Camden Hills. So that has helped our high school population remain very strong, because we have a lot of, and we have 73 students who aren't residents. Some parents are paying tuition who live in neighboring towns. So we have a lot of students at the high school, but the elementary, I mean, I can see down the road, there's no question, that is I mean, I am here to tell you that is a significant drop. I don't think it's been below 63 since I've been here. So it's a significant drop.
great, thank you very much. Next, we have Denise Needham here with Penn Bay Medical Center and
I'm Gemma
Gemma.
from Community Health from Penn Bay.
And I can kick us off. I mean, again, I don't think our challenges are unique. I would say in healthcare specifically, and I'm Denise, sorry. This is Gemma. I would say specifically for healthcare, what's unique about us is that our client base is growing. So, you know, the population is aging, and so we have more patients and we have fewer people to take care of them. And one of the most significant challenges that we're facing right now is housing. So we have the need for more individuals to care for more patients, and we need to provide development programs for our individuals so they can grow into new roles, but we don't have enough people to grow into those roles. So it's not about, you know, just developing our own internal candidates. We need to bring people from the outside to this area, and that's what we've been unable to accomplish to date, because even if we were fortunate enough to hire from out of state or out of town, what happens is the individual will accept the position, they will come, we will put them up in temporary housing that we've secured for them. So we've got some rental agreements that we have around the two counties, Knox and Waldo, that we secured in order to get people started. But then when they can't find permanent housing, they end up going back to where they came from. They'll find a new place of employment outside of state. And that's just what we're running in right now. We've got several hundred open positions that we have that we're unable to fill, and it's because yeah. So we have a need, right? We have a need for all sorts of different professionals. And again, it's not as simple as, we can develop our own, because we bring a lot of folks in who come in environmental services or food services, and we'll grow our own, but they've already got, housing here, whether they live with their parents, which is most frequently the case. I had an IT engineer recently asked me if we could pay him more so he could move out of his parents' basement. And the reality of it is us paying a higher wage to that individual is still not gonna get them out of their parents' basement, because the inventory here is low as well. It's not just that housing is expensive, but there's not a significant inventory for people to draw from. And I had to laugh when my husband and I, we recently went to Colorado, which is where we moved here from originally, and he made a comment after looking at all of the housing that was going up, and it just keeps growing and growing. And the landscape is just very different because there's a lot of different housing opportunities there. And he said, do they really have enough people to put in all these apartments? And the reality of it is that they do, and they're all full, right? And they're building more. And, then we come here and the landscape's just very unique, right? It's just a different landscape here than it is there. But the need is here, and we need to grow in order to be able to accommodate, certainly in the health care realm, we need to be able to grow to accommodate the aging population. And so that's, what we're up against and why I'm here today, and I'll let Gemma speak to her end of things as well.
Thank you. I'm Gemma Penberthy. I'm the Director of Community Health for Penn Bay and Waldo County General Hospital. Thank you. Is that on? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
No.
Oh, no? Okay. Is it? And I think to add to it on a more micro scale is I watch my employees. A couple of them have had to move in the past couple of years. And our office is in Rockport, and they have to move further and further outside of our area. And that is challenging. It's more costly in terms of transportation. It takes longer to get to work. They have children. It's more complicated. And it's nice to be able to work near where you live, and you feel very invested when you're working and living in the same place, especially when you're working in community health. Another thing that I will add is working in community health, we have a lot of relationships with community-based organizations in Knox and Waldo County. And in speaking specifically for Knox County, housing comes up at almost every meeting that we're in. So if we're in Knox County Recovery Coalition meeting, or we're in another meeting with, let's say, Volunteers of America, it comes up all of the time with people who are working with members of the community. We're also building a community health worker program within our department. It's very new. However, we have about 5 referrals now. We've just started taking them. All of them have housing issues. That says a lot. It also, and the last thing I'll leave on is we implement the community health implementation plan, which is based on the community health needs assessment, which is done every 3 years. It's in combination with the hospitals as well as the main CDC. And housing is brought up a lot, and they talk about how not only is housing unavailable, but it can cost upwards of 50% of a family's money for the month to pay for their housing. And I think that's just something we should keep in mind when we're talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, if Barrett, do you want to speak about Cedarworks as one of our
Sure,
employees?
I can speak about it briefly. Barrett Brown, I'm a resident of Rockport. I'll also mention I have adult and near adult children. I'd love to think of them being able to come back and live here, but it's pretty expensive. But in terms of our company, we've struggled like everyone else in recent years being able to find employees. We have very few employees who actually live in Rockport. Some of our administrative staff, but our actual workers, it's a non-starter. And we had a particular circumstance in this last year where one of our vendors was shutting down their operation. We bought their assets and we made offers to their employees, substantial wage and benefit increases over where they were, including a particular manager who we were very keen on. But once they took a look at housing here, they were just a non-starter. And by the time they did the math, there was just no way, even though it would have been a great opportunity for all of them. So it's just kind of sad that we ended up with the equipment, but no one to run it. So we made do as we could. So just an anecdote, but any business in this area could tell the same story.
Yeah, you just keep thinking about all these wonderfully new people who could be in our community and contributing to our sort of vibrancy and growth, and to keep losing those opportunities. Thank you, Barrett. Sam, do you want to speak for Rockport Marine?
Oh, sure. So I'm Sam Temple from Rockport Marine. I have similar anecdotes to the other employers here. I had a meeting with a former employee today who he's got 2 kids under 5, and he'd like to move back and come back to work, and he's trying to find a place to live. My employees tend to be, their version of the Maine dream tends to be more a few acres and, you know, a shop and a place they can let the dog run out the door. And they tend to be focused on a place where they can put some sweat equity in and get a return. So a lot of the young people might start as apartment, dwellers, but that's not their interest primarily. I'm used to them finding places in Warren, Union, up Route 17 as far as Washington. I've got a lot of longtime employees who tend to be more local because they got in early, but the younger people, I think it's a good score if they can find something in Hope, Appleton, or Lincolnville and at least get, partial access to the school system.
Great, thank you.
What is partial access to the school system?
Meaning those towns join in high school.
During high school,
and
but not for elementary school?
Yeah, and I tend to think of those outlying towns as having, pretty good elementary
Yeah.
schools. I guess it's through middle school, yeah.
And they predominantly are aged where they have kids, young kids?
Yeah, they tend to be focused that way, yeah.
Why?
We have Whitney with the Y here.
Hi, thank you. I guess the same narrative that you're hearing from all of us is pretty similar at the Y. In the last year, all the full-time staff that we've hired, none of them have come from Rockport. Anecdotally, all of the interviews that we're having right now, we're pulling in people from Jefferson, from Washington, Searsport. We just can't find staff that live here who can afford to take the types of positions that we offer, which are often, lower wage positions, $18 to $22 an hour. And the folks that we can hire there are living with their parents. So that tends to be the theme that we're seeing. We're losing good staff who are moving away. We lost someone who moved to Bangor for more affordable housing. I have staff who work with me right now who are sort of in inadequate housing situations. One person who's well paid for the Y has been in seasonal rentals for well over 2 years, trying to find a home for herself. And I have another employee that I recently heard about who's living in really substandard housing, has children, and the heat is questionable, and just a lot of inappropriate housing situations that people can't do much about because they don't know where else they will move to. So they make do with what they have. So it's definitely the same struggles that we're all facing with. And if we want to ensure we have childcare workers and those types of staff lines, we need to find a place where they can live, and we also need to pay them better than we're doing now.
Great, thank you. Stewart, do you want to say anything about employment? Not to put you on the spot, just.
I guess I would say everything that has been spoken of already is
Yeah.
definitely true. there's only one person on our construction crew that lives in either Camden or Rockport, other than Tyler and myself.
Mhm.
And, you just, you just pick up the MLS, I look at real estate all the time, and there's not much under 500 to 600,000 that you could move into.
Yeah.
Anything else, well, there's hardly anything for sale less than 500,000.
Mhm.
And the ones that are need a lot of work.
Yeah.
Buy a piece of land in Rockport or Camden is, to start building, you're looking at a $200,000 lot, and that's not even, that's not looking at the ocean or anything like that, that's just like a basic lot.
Mhm.
And these are lots and houses, lots that used to sell for $55,000, $60,000. And those are not around anymore.
Yeah.
It's a supply and demand thing, and Tyler's not here right now, but, his idea, his concept that affordable housing is not gonna happen in Rockport and Camden. It's gonna be in Hope, Appleton, Lincolnville, Warren, and all of our carpenters and plumbers and electricians that come to work for us, they all drive 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. When I went up the Common Ground Fair yesterday, I drove through most of the towns where these guys live.
Mhm.
Montville, Searsmont, and you're driving half an hour. I had one kid driving from Bucksport.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
It's not a very good situation.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else wanted to weigh in on sort of the employer side of things? And I think we captured everyone who's here. Next are a couple housing projects that are in the very early stages of development. And I don't want to put anybody on the spot because these are early stages of development, but in terms of, I think through the Economic Development Committee has become aware of, we have Maisie Cox, Brinkley Thorne, and Mark Peterson, who have a project, and I'll just see what you guys want to say about that, or some thoughts on contributing to housing in Rockport.
Well, I'll start that. I didn't want to say too much about it because we're really, we're sort of fact-finding and seeing what the needs are, and the needs are pretty extreme. And the economic constraints are really severe. And we do have a piece of property that has many very good qualities for providing some housing for the workforce, that it's close to town, doesn't take a lot of transportation, you've got access to the supermarket and the Y and things. It's also a very difficult, it's not a big flat open field that somebody stopped doing a dairy farm on and wants to put up 100 houses on. It's the quarry land, and it's rocky and it's rough. So it needs, even if we started doing housing, it needs the septic, plumbing system, support, infrastructure that downtown house lots might have, that it doesn't have now. I think that it would require and it'd be appropriate, I look at areas like Jacobs Avenue or something that are, small houses, maybe larger than bungalow houses, but that's, sort of in that range, that are very close together on a street and make a really wonderful place. That kind of approach for part of a piece of land that's difficult to spread out in because it's so rocky and it doesn't have infrastructure, that's one of the things that sort of sits there. How much can you cluster housing in a way that, our interest as architects, we'd want to work on something that makes a place, that is memorable for people, where people would really like to be, and not just drop a bunch of flying saucers down in the middle of a field. So to do that, it takes some detail work and some recognition of the landscape that you're working with, but a way to bring out attributes of that. But we'd need, you know, I don't want to talk too much about it because it would take a lot for this, a site like this to need a lot of help in terms of plumbing and lighting, getting under. Maybe it'd be a single street through it. It does have access at both ends, you know, where all the services are in that street underneath, and to try to create a real neighborhood street again. And that's not, again, you know, as Stewart said, it's hard to find anything at under $500,000. I don't know, you know, how do we build something that you could sell with land costs and infrastructure costs, you know, in that range? Or, you know, less than that.
Yeah.
And, but we'd like to. I mean, we'd like to figure out how to make something like that work. And I think we've thought also, is there, you know, is there an appropriate part of this to have a building that's got, you know, it's got like 10 or 11 units that are in a single building. We've seen some really nice projects like this that are sort of wood, board and batten, Norwegian, maritime kind of places that aren't overwhelming. Maybe have a couple of places like that that were really apartment condo pieces, and then try to do a street with houses on it. And have more of the land that's still, it's very beautiful, but it's not farmland, you know, come off the back of it, go down. So we're, you know, Mark is an architect who we appreciate and like, and who's got some thoughts about it. And, you know, we're just trying to say, how would we even start this without raising any expectations that we can solve the housing,
Right.
you know, worker housing project? It's gonna take some real imagination.
Yeah, and you're down in
We're
the
not there
weeds
yet,
where
you know?
where the sort of rubber meets the road and the
Yeah.
cost of construction becomes a reality.
Just have to say, it's wonderful to hear all these voices. It's been wonderful, the meeting that Deborah called, you know, wanting to work with us and find out where the obstacles are. You know, we've started a couple of times on this and just kind of like, oh God, this is just overwhelming, and we stop and our energy goes into other things. And so that's why we hooked up with Mark, he's the son of a friend of ours, and it was just turned out he lives in Belfast and went to the same architecture school. And so we thought, we need some young energy here to help us kind of plow through all the details and the hard, you know, just Scrabble work that it takes to do it, and maybe help us sort of work through this. So we're just at the beginning, but we feel the need, you know, we want to kind of see how we can make something happen that will help fulfill this need. And I don't know whether we can or not, but we would like to, and we're definitely gonna need some help and support from the town.
That's great.
Which we feel very open to working with us, and that's a wonderful thing. So we're very appreciative of that.
Great. Yeah, we're definitely flexible in wanting to hear where the impediments, what we've got in our, either our land use ordinance or codes that are sort of getting in the way of what we need for workforce housing in the town.
I think, as Deborah pointed out, these, you know, pocket neighborhoods that have been getting publicity a lot in the Northwest when they sort of first came out here, you know, it can be quite dense, but if they're done well, and there's landscaping and some attention to privacy where it's in some aspects, and also being very public in others. You're not predicated on having that 5 acres for the dog to run in necessarily that has a view of the ocean. But I think you could have a denser inner working street or neighborhood, and this land that we're thinking of is like 12 to 14 acres, and there's land for the dogs to run. They're just, you're not gonna just look out over a clear field, because it's a rocky place to get in that quarry land.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I think there are models out there in the world of great dense neighborhoods that people really like to live in and are really happy to be living in, and that they take care of.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part when you get down to subsistence housing, is, you know, finding a way that people have enough feeling of ownership or caring about it, or community, that they take care of it.
Yep.
Too, and it grows with places for kids to play and dogs to pee and shops, you know,
Yep.
in some form or other that can be on the land. And maybe, you know, there's a barn or some storage places, or there's some, the other thing is the sort of granny apartments that come up where you have a house and then you have secondary living spaces over
Does zoning allow that,
garages.
granny apartments?
Well, that is something Orion will
do.
touch on, but we now have a state law that requires communities to allow for what they refer to as accessory dwelling units, which is what
That was
is.
huge in the town that we moved from, Northampton, when they
Yeah.
made that happen. It just helped, same issue,
Yeah.
helped so much when
Yeah.
that happened.
Yeah, so Orion will get to some of that because that's an important piece of this as well.
I had one,
issue with that is that people that do that, flip them right around and they rent them by the.
Well, and that's the thing, like, we've got to do
If the
something about
granny
short-term
house becomes
rentals
a
or we
weekly
lose that
rental.
housing.
Right.
$2,500 a week.
Yep. Yeah, we have to address short-term rentals before that will be a meaningful change to our housing stock.
no, it's all there. I was,
Right,
I had,
let's let other people.
well, I just want to say one thing. We had a friend visit with just for a couple of days. He was in a mobile van that he'd fixed up. He was going out to California for the winter, which he's done for the last 4 years. He has 200,000 miles on his van, to stay with someone who has a larger house and also has 4 yurts on the property. And they're 4 close friends of the person in the major house that live in the yurts, and they all share meals in the large house together. I mean, they've sort of worked out with that situation,
Yeah, so
And
lots
so
of
there's-
different models.
you know, and that's not a zoning thing, but somehow that, you know, people are figuring out how to share some more of the, a little more communally, but still have privacy.
Richard Remsen is also here, who's got a well-known project that I want to just have you say a word or two about Ingram Corner.
Well, I wanted to touch on a few things. Deb, you had mentioned pocket neighborhoods, and I'm not sure how many people have been up to Bayside. I mean, that is a tremendous neighborhood. And many of those houses are on a 20th of an acre. In fact, I looked at density of housing in Rockland, for example, and there are over 200 house lots that are on a 10th of an acre and less. So part of the affordability has to do with the cost of the land. And then the other element is the cost of the building. And everyone around here loves to stick build, but there's no way in the world that that is an affordable method. Factory-built homes have taken huge leaps in aesthetics and efficiency. So in order to produce an affordable house, you have to get the costs of building that house way down. When Shirley and I were in DC for a high school reunion, we just stumbled onto the mall, and they had an experimental housing, factory-built housing, that was all on the mall, and it was really interesting stuff. When Joe Cloutier was alive, he and I were looking at 3D printed homes, which are very interesting and also very affordable. One of you had mentioned that people are looking, maybe they'll move into a small house or apartment, but they have greater goals and they're looking ahead. I don't think you can solve all the issues in a single lot or a home, but I think community is really the key. And it all gets back to the comprehensive plan, which through state mandates said, the towns should establish growth areas and rural areas. And fortunately, West Rockport is a growth area. And to make those growth areas work, to get that extra density where you're looking at lots that are 1/8 of an acre or less, you need all of the infrastructure. You need the water, your sewer, and to create any kind of commercial downtown, you're gonna need high-speed internet. So there's so many elements that are necessary to create a community. And I think that is what I see lacking in the effort for workforce housing. You're looking at single elements, but you want to create a community. So these people are your friends and neighbors. They're working at the hospital or they're working at the school. There's places to walk. Our particular project, Ingraham Corner, we have a little over 200 acres, and there are paths that go up to Ragged Mountain. So there are areas along the stream that are just ideal for, recreational hiking and things like that. So we're working with the town, and of course, the issue of sewer down into West Rockport is dependent on the relationship of Camden and Rockport, which at some point will get resolved. But you can't build a high-density community without it.
Yeah.
Absolutely without it. And so I think that's the key element. In our particular project, there are also other elements. There's architectural codes and urban codes. So you can't just kaplunk, a log cabin as much as you'd like to. That might work better out in Searsmont, where you've got your 3 acres. But if you're in a community, tight-packed, you're gonna need to have a relationship of the houses to the streetscape. You're gonna need to have pathways. Part of our project connects to the back of the skate park. So there's a lot of possibilities for mothers to stop, driving their kids to the skate park when they could actually walk over there. So I think looking at the multimodal, interconnected ways of hiking, biking, all of those things make a community. And when I left Rhode Island School of Design and moved to West Rockport, the Foundry was 13.5. And there were lots of properties that were 18, 20,000, because West Rockport was kind of an abandoned area and it was cheap. So what's happened with the communities that we really like is that lots of other people like them too. And so there's this huge influx of people with money who say, I love this community, I want to be able to walk to the waterfront, want to be able to walk to French and Braun. It's impossible to create affordability within those communities. You have to build new communities. That's how it works. Millville is a good example in Camden. Behind where the Tent Works used to be, I don't know how many people are familiar with the Tent Works, but that was a very affordable area in town. There were trailers, true, but that was the manufactured housing of its day.
Yep.
It's not the case today. So I think I would recommend people go up to Bayside and take a look, because it's a wonderful community. Kids and dogs and people are out, it happens to be on the water, which is great. And Temple Heights, for those people that are into spiritual seances, that's close by as well. So,
Good, thank you. That's a good overview
That
of
was good.
a lot of the
Well
creativity.
stated.
So next we have John Goss and Tony Peterman here from the Midcoast Regional Housing Trust to talk about the role housing trusts can play in helping to develop workforce housing.
Introduce us. I am Jonathan Goss.
I am Tony Peterman.
So Midcoast Regional Housing Trust was incorporated in '22 and received its 501c3 tax status in early 2023. And one of the first things we did in '22 was to generate a needs assessment, very conservative one for Knox County area. Some of you may have read it. It's on our website. If you haven't, download it and take a look at it. But in a very conservative manner, we determined or published that 800 units of new housing would be needed in Knox County if there were no economic growth and you only had to provide housing for those replacing the seniors that were going to retire in their own home. So that was a huge number, and it really struck us. And I think that goes to the sense that there is so much housing need that housing developed in any tier of housing, other than the very wealthiest, Ocean Point housing, helps housing move along, as I think Deborah said. And so Midcoast Regional Housing Trust decided we would follow a housing trust model to try to help with that effort. And I think there's a lot of good ideas about housing here. I hope every one of them happens. I don't think we're in a competitive world as far as competing for housing. Thank you. So could you start us on the first slide? So we brought, 6 or 7 slides that it'll just run through, and our goal is to give you enough information to kick off a really good Q&A session, because rather than just have us go on about things, like to do the Q&A. I'm going to start with the slide that's up here right now. And there are 9 other housing trusts in Maine. When we were forming ours, we interviewed and did a benchmark study in each one of them. We also did a benchmark study and worked closely with the people at the Champlain Housing Trust. Burlington, Vermont is was very early in housing trust, and they have a really great model. They also had Bernie Sanders in the 70s, who brought several $1 million in from a federal grant to kick it off. It's okay, but I have it on my laptop if you need it.
You want to go back?
I would like to start at slide 1.
My mistake. It was up there and you called for it? Like that?
Slide 1 says John Goss and Tony Peterman. Okay, so we can next slide on that. So a little bit about us, and that is that our mission is advancing permanent year-round workforce housing. That's our little niche, and to do that in Knox County and neighboring towns. And our vision is something that I think I've heard people use different words for. It's vibrant communities of economically diverse residents who want to live, work, and retire in this region where they are. So with that in mind, next slide, please. The common elements of housing trusts. This was up, some of you may have read this, but housing trusts are really focused on that housing being available in perpetuity. Housing trusts don't build junk because they're responsible for it. Even if they sell it, when it's sold back to the housing trust to be recycled to the same segment of economic population that it was built for. So it does, this makes some people unhappy, but it does remove that housing from the free market system. It's a pay it forward. Someone who wants to get a housing start and doesn't want to dump their money into rent, but would like to have a mortgage, when they sell it back, they'll get their mortgage money back. But they know they pay it forward because at the resale, the increase in the home's market value, if it were on the market, is shared between the trust and the homeowner based on a prearranged equity sharing formula. Those people know they are not going to get full market recapture when they go. They get all the investment they have put into their house. Most housing trusts have rules about, what you invest in your house, because in the end, it still has to be sold back to somebody in that 80 to 120% AMI range. Local property taxes for the home are paid by the homeowner. Rental properties that the trust builds are owned by the trust. The general principle is that you're allowing people to get started and that they will ideally save money and upgrade their housing over time. That's a pretty simple thing, and Tony and I could probably talk about that for a day. But next slide. So 9 other housing trusts, and they're all different. Every one of these housing trusts has a different focus based on the community they're serving. Very few of them are regional like we are. Most of them are about a specific town: Deer Isle, Freeport, Kennebunkport. But Island Housing Trust on Mountain Desert Island was a good model for us. They have 4 towns that are working together on that. we aren't inventing it, we are adopting these premises. Next, please, Jeff. People, yeah, you want that one? Yeah,
just
please.
no, if we could go back one.
Yeah.
The one different element from our housing trust from these is that for the most part, each one of these, the local community came and said, we need this. The housing trust didn't come first, right? The community came to the housing trust folks and said, here's a piece of land, here's a piece of land, here's some capital to get started, and then they went and grew over time. We didn't start that way, right? We don't have a big pot of public dollars or a lot of public land, any public land. So that is one, I think it's worth
Thank you.
noting, right?
No, definitely, thank you. Thanks.
And I think just to clarify, so it's the Rotary who was sort of examining housing problems and issues in the area that sort of helped form.
So this housing trust really formed as a result of a Camden Rotary Workforce Economics series that we did to educate ourselves during the pandemic and made that open to the public. But we also we merged with a group of concerned citizens that were working with Jeremy Martin, planner in Camden, trying to figure out what they could do. And they and we were thinking about housing trusts, so we merged efforts. Yep. So next slide, if you would, please. So basically, our goal is to target Knox County and you can read it, but working household, our demographic and service region demographic is working households and the economic vitality of the communities in Knox County, as well as adjacent communities in Waldo and Lincoln counties. And it's really, in general, the housing market's missing middle. Teachers, healthcare, tradespeople, and other workforce households who don't qualify for housing aid. This group that we're targeting isn't in the poor and distressed, as the IRS describes it. We do have IRS 501c status to go well beyond that, and anybody who's interested will tell you how we did that, but that's our goal.
No, and I think we had breakfast earlier, we talked about kind of the folks that have the need, and you gave a ballpark range of salaries for those, and your number, that's the missing middle. I mean, your folks are kind of the start of that middle, and your folks are a little higher up, but they're still the middle, and there's simply nothing in this community or the one up the street they can afford. And this is where they want to be. And how nice was it when this young lady walked in the room? Wasn't that a nice feeling, right? Having
Yeah.
another person enter the room, right? Wouldn't it be nice to have more of that?
Yeah. Jeff, next, please. Do you want to do it?
No, go ahead.
So the impediments that we see on our board, it really is the availability of building sites with higher density zoning and, as already been said, existing infrastructure access. That's a huge issue. Public and nonprofit funding, we're working our model on private funding right now. Their banks will loan us money. The people that we're targeting can pay for the product, but the product can't be $500,000. So we're looking for some public and nonprofit funding to help us bridge that gap. We all know building materials and construction costs are going up, and it's, the lack of robust construction workforce pool, as has been pointed out, that's a big deal. It's hard to get contractors, and we've been talking to people who said, well, I've got a project, but it won't even start for 2 years. And so that's another issue, but that's a catch-22. Next
John,
slide,
you've
please.
talked a little bit on that subject about looking at alternatives to the stick-built housing that Richard mentioned, that just is not affordable.
Just like Richard said, and David Pio talked about at the planning board meeting. The housing that we need to create needs to be quality housing, but it's not gonna be able to do stick-built housing. And so it will probably be from, an example, KBS out of the Waterville area. They build homes in rectangles, and then they come and set them all up like Legos. And then you have a house that doesn't look like manufactured housing and doesn't feel like manufactured housing, but it was built well in a dry environment, in a controlled environment. And they do it pretty efficiently. They can generate, their idea of basic workforce housing in our research with them, for $280 a square foot. But that does not include site work. That does not include, the site work and everything else that needs to happen in a foundation. But they will set it there for as little as $280,000. I think when you think about energy efficiency and heat pumps and a few other things, then it'll go up a little bit. But we are optimistic that we will be able to build probably in the 350 per square foot. That's our goal, And we're not gonna sit here and tell you we've done it,
Yeah.
because we're just talking to the experts. Please.
Do any of these land trusts have, multi-units, like one block of housing, like you see in Scandinavia, that might have 10 units in it?
Yeah.
Do any of these land trusts in Maine have that? Or are they all single houses?
No, and I just gonna, and don't take this personally, we're not a land trust, but a housing trust.
I mean, a
because
housing trust, I'm sorry.
The land
I
trusts
meant
in
to
this
say
area are very happy.
I meant to say housing trust, I'm sorry.
Very happy to work
Yeah.
with us, but
No,
there's
I
a
meant
little
to say
different.
housing trust. Do
Yeah.
any of them have, like one building with multiple units in it?
Yes.
They
yes.
do.
Down by Portland, Westbrook, has multiple units, multiple assets.
And has
that
that
are-
worked out?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And those are things, if a community wants that housing, Rockland is interested in rentals, and they don't mind larger blocks of housing like that. But the housing trust is gonna look to the community and see what that community wants and needs there. I don't know if we're answering your question, but in Maine, it's really the metropolitan centers that are building that through housing trust.
The other, the bigger projects are great and they absolutely should be pursued, but as you all well know, that they take time, right? But, so we're not looking for just home runs, we're also looking for, 3 units, 6 units. We're kind of focused as a board on adaptive reuse, renovating existing structures so that we take the infrastructure, right, the utilities out of the math equation that already is upside down. As a board, we first explored the McLean School in Rockland, that type of asset, right? That would be ideal for 12 to 16 units of folks. And there's some, go ahead, question?
So, Tia, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to a little bit, but you can punt it back to me if you say like, don't, this is the wrong thing. I feel like you told me that Habitat builds for around 150, it used to be 100 square foot. Are there ways that, like, you all could be supporting her to do, if you're looking to build cheaper, is there a way that you, like, some of your projects can be scaled through work that they're doing?
I would say there's definitely room for collaboration. We do it right now with the Community Development Corp down in St. George. We work with the Knox County Homeless Coalition. We're a developer. We stick build, but our development on Talbot Avenue has modular construction as well. So we have a diverse portfolio, and we built a pocket neighborhood in the north end of Rockland.
And T and our group have had conversations about that, and we all agreed that there is no competition here. We'd be happy to collaborate. We should probably talk about that more, but what we're looking to do isn't exactly like Firefly Field. And T, it is correct, you have a lot of volunteer builders as well, right? And so to build on a larger scale of, let's say we're gonna try to be doing 200 units of housing in the next 5 years, that's hard to do with volunteer labor. And correct me if you think I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's where collaboration comes in. So when you can do a mixed development.
Right.
and that's what we're doing. Firefly Field is a mixed development. Philbrook Commons on the north end of Rockland, which is a pocket neighborhood, was completely stick-built. They're smaller footprints, smaller lots. We got contracts only for that from the city, because they understood the concept and the need. And so now we have 12 homeowners there. You know, I think, again, there are a lot of models that will work, and I think everybody has to participate to generate the amount of housing we need and to address the different brackets.
Next time.
Yes.
You know, now that the Housing Trust is kind of, for me, has come on the scene, I feel like, and I've always had this feeling, it came from this gentleman named Andres Dwami, who says, instead of this or that, both end. And oftentimes we get stuck in either this or that. And I think, you know, the RES site was either we looked at it, you know, talked to a developer and it had to be so much housing and it wasn't possible. And Linda, you know, the Lesher Foundation has stepped in and, you know, has been wonderful in the creation of this park. But I feel like it could be both and, because the town owns the land and there could be the possibility on part of it to have a couple of housing blocks and have it owned by the housing trust, and to work to overlook the park, have eyes on the park, eyes on the street was what Andres Dwami would say. And there might be some way for these two, you know, everyone to work together to make that happen, to have it be a both and, to offer some housing with the housing trust and also have this wonderful park that, you know, the Lesher Foundation has been working with.
I just want to interject on that, because I don't think we're gonna have housing on the RES site, but that's not to say that, I mean, that's why we're here. Is we heard loud and clear that it's important to our community and it's important to us.
I'm just throwing that out, the both
Well, I
and.
just want it to be clear that let's
Yeah.
not get, that's not the direction, and it's just because of the logistics of having town-owned land, a town vote. We already had the vote for the RES site, but we're definitely passionate and committed to working with the town and changes we can make to both our land use ordinance and our zoning code and our infrastructure to facilitate workforce housing development. So I just don't want us to get down a direction that really
No, I
isn't
just-
going to be fruitful.
I think there was
'cause-
an opportunity missed there, the both and, instead of the two, you know.
Yeah,
Kind of throw it out.
Yep.
I'll give it up.
okay. Yeah, and that doesn't mean the both and doesn't mean housing. It just, you know, I think there's a lot of good things scary things we're hearing, but also some good energy here. So I think that's been helpful. And I think the Housing Trust is, you know, is a really essential component, and we're fortunate. The planning board had a meeting a while ago to talk about workforce housing, and they had one of the legislators from Kennebunkport who had come up. She was part of the LD 2003, which we'll hear more about from Orion, about sort of the state attempts to facilitate development of housing in Maine. And one of the first things she said is, you need a housing trust. If you're serious about workforce housing, you've got to have a housing trust. And fortunately, we have one. And, you know, we can build from that. So anyway, just to
I think that might be the last slide. Jeff, can you pop the next one up? I think it's going to say questions, please. So Tony and I would most like to have everybody in this room understand how a housing trust operates and what it means to the people that are going to be residents under a housing trust. So please. Sam.
Maybe walk me through what it would look like when somebody decides to move, you know, when somebody sells the house.
So in each development that happens, wherever community and whatever pocket neighborhood or wherever it's going to be, there's going to be parameters that are preset. So if this is a, you know, it's probably going to be a mixed neighborhood, as Tia said. We are more interested in not clustering economic segments into their own little pocket. But each owner will understand if they join us, and it's not likely that people below 140 or 150% of area median income would opt for this, because if you can afford to buy a house at market rate and ride the appreciation that it will probably have, you're going to do that. So, but those people are going to sign on understanding that when they sell, the housing trust has first refusal, and the housing trust always buys it back. That's just the deal. So the formula for a particular cluster of homes might be that the appreciation that will happen is either indexed, the increase in the area median income that it's built for. So if it's made for people in the 80 to 90 or 100%, so that area median income rises by 5 or 10%, then that's pretty much a no-brainer. Many of the housing trusts that we benchmarked will pad that with another $25,000, but they rely on donors to make up that difference.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, some of your folks are spending 50%. The rule of thumb is 30 to 35% of a person's salary can go towards housing, and that's how the formula will work, right? So a person making 80% of AMI would come in, figure out that what they could afford based on 35% of their income. That's the cost of that house. Let's say it's $200,000. And then they live there for 5 years, and that AMI has risen how it ever, how it will rise in the future. And that same 35% number will be assessed to it. That's the value of that house, because they're selling it, but they're replacing themselves with the same type of buyer, right? Which is part of the housing trust system. And then let's say that they bought it for 200, it's now worth 250. They'll pocket 30,000, and the housing trust will use the 20 to offset. And the other beauty, the magic of the housing trust is that there is no profit in it, right? All of the profit that a developer, and nothing against developers, I am one, that it goes back into the project so that you build a better product, right? Or you're able to do more of them. But back to your question, then that seller pockets 30,000 and the housing trust gets 20.
But they recoup their investment.
Oh, for sure.
And then they will take less than market rate appreciation. But they were able to get into the market. They were able to not just lose their money in rent. And hopefully their career has advanced a little bit, and maybe they are doing better just because of their own career. And they may move up. In Champlain, in Burlington area, Champlain Housing Trust, they have many residents that have never left the system. They keep moving, and some people find that first home. They don't have to go anywhere. They can stay there till they're 100, and they do. But others will, families grow, and they will turn it over to the housing trust, take that appreciation, go to the next step. So it's a starter for some people, and it's lifetime housing for others. But rephrase your question if I'm missing something.
It was very helpful to understand that, there is appreciation that the, that it appreciates with the market, but, not in a, not, proportionally, but not fully. Yeah.
But the practical matter here, given the cost to build and the rising interest rate environment, is that we're going to be focused on rentals for a while. Because the math it works better.
So, and that is if we're going for private funding. If we do our funding through the local banks, who are be very happy to do that, then we need an income stream to make that fly. But if we can get some financing or some funding to help us establish, a piece of land with a little cluster development on it, we're not opposed to doing homes, if that's what the community wants.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mary Jane and Dom from Lesher Family Foundation.
Hi, Mary Jane, or MJ Young, with the Lesher Family Foundation. We are working with the town to build a park at the former RES site, as you all know. We certainly see the need for projects like these to account for potential additional development like housing. And we do understand that there are parcels that exist in Rockport where things like pocket neighborhoods could be built. We're very interested in talking to those who know about these parcels.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Maybe
It
it could be just me.
is it on?
Oh, that's much better.
That
Thank
was
you.
my spiel, so I'll turn it over to Dom.
Thanks, MJ. Dominic Pepper, and thank you for all of your words tonight. It's been really insightful to hear from all of you and to learn with you. The Leshers right now, we are on a tour of listening in communities to understand what needs are there so that we can figure out how we're going to best jump in to support the issues that are most pressing in each of those communities. Some of them exist around childcare. There's a national crisis around childcare. And Whitney, thank you for all the work that you and the Y are doing on that. We're super proud of all of that and our partnership with you. Housing is one of them that is also coming clearly into focus right now for the family. But we don't exactly know how we're going to jump in. There's a couple places that we've thought through. If we think of the continuum, probably inventory, which could look like land or building, is going to be the most clear and the obvious. But financing would be another one. We've been thinking mostly about land trusts, so I have to kind of reframe around housing trusts and how maybe those can work together. Philanthropy or CDFIs, what other ways maybe we can provide financing or down payments or other ways that might be able to, what we're learning from other places for where philanthropists are jumping in. And then down to policy, which could be zoning, could be like micro zoning or could be larger zoning things, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. So there's different ways that we're looking across the spectrum. Our first step has been to reach out to a community of experts, other nonprofits. We talked to TIA, obviously, for a bit. We've talked to Knox County. We've also talked to a bunch of nonprofits working in the housing space across the United States. Professors and researchers, city employees, past professors. I was at the Woodrow Wilson, or formerly Woodrow Wilson School for a bit. So learning a little bit about what the space looks like. And the first thing that I wanted to mention offhanded is that I'm hoping that, and probably as the newest person in the room here, can land a series of common definitions when we're speaking so that we're speaking the same language. Because, well, let me give an example. If I say the word horse, I have in my mind, I don't know, Black Beauty. And Denise has My Little Pony. And Orion has a Budweiser Clydesdale. I said one word, and 3 drastically different images came to mind. MJ is thinking about the basketball game, horse. So what we need to do is come to common terms. So some of the terms that I've even heard today, workforce housing. This is one of the things where, what % of AMI are we actually looking at? Because that probably does dramatically change what type of federal funding or state funding we can get, or what other ways we might need to be thinking about setting up our solutions. Housing, are we talking about multifamily? I know one of the things that Habitat talked a lot about is the kind of single-family units are really important. So what does housing actually mean? Another one is close. The Census Bureau has, in 2022, put out an average commute time of 27.6 minutes one way nationally. So when 15 minutes is far lower than that, what are we talking about with close? So this is where some sort of set of terms I think would be really helpful for that. So that's sort of where we are right now. We are on this kind of learning journey, and how we can be helpful is going to be also evolving. MJ? Well, okay.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And I think, workforce housing, I think, John, you all have a definition of workforce housing in terms of 80 to 120% AMI.
We look at 80 to 120, maybe 140% as workforce housing. And, we can get main housing funds readily for, up to 80%. They have a wonderful program for rural rental programs right now that they are pitching hard in our areas. Rural Maine is anything except Portland, Lewis, and Auburn. And so but it's very restrictive. You cannot have a mixed residential situation because it is up to 80%. And everybody that we interviewed and talked to has said that, yes, you might do a project like that. We might have a community that wants, housing for 60 to 80% of AMI. And we could do it through Maine Housing, but it is apparently very difficult to work with Maine Housing. Maine Housing is a grant, has given a grant to Genesis, who is, in order for them to be technical advisors to new housing entities like ourselves. And we have two people at Genesis who are very, very familiar with Maine Housing. They would love to see us do a Maine Housing project. That takes a site where you could do 18 units, 16 to 18 units, because you will not win the selection process to do 3 units. It's that Maine Housing wants this to go, they want some bang for their buck. So we just haven't come up with that site yet.
I think I was even mentioning that more in the sense of, I want to know if that range is right for the people that Whitney is looking for housing for, or that you're looking at the nurses or the teachers. Like, I don't know what those percentages are. I mean, if we can start to identify that, then maybe you'll start to understand what the right market need is. And also if you're looking for land, I don't know, one of the things we are working to build a park. If that park can be sited amid housing developments, and that can be helpful and additive, if there are units that are around there that might make sense, that would be something that we'd be thrilled to talk about and to think through.
And something that we want to start talking about now before the park starts being designed and planned so that it can accommodate for this kind of development.
Yeah, if we could find something adjacent to the RES site or something like that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But
One thing I wanted to mention, just to give a perspective. A number of years ago, my brother-in-law, Richard Arno, and I looked at Rockland in the workforce area, the people that were working in the community. 100 acres. How many houses were there on 100 acres? Rockland had 350 houses on 100 acres. Camden had 250 on 100 acres. 100 acres is not a big area. So in order to create that housing, you need to change the zoning so you make things more compact. But I just wanted to give perspective on how much housing on 100 acres, for example.
Great, thank you. Thanks, all of you. And Orion, our town planner, want to present some?
Hey, everybody. So a lot of what everybody has said is absolutely true. Zoning has to change, and we have to have adequate sewage to handle the developments that we need. The first one is an easy one. We can handle that one quite simply. The other one, the sewage capacity issue and expanding sewer, we're working on. Hopefully we can solve that one soon.
What was the first one, Orion?
Changing the ordinance. The zoning.
To allow denser, less land per house unit, per unit?
Right, so changing that. So that'll lead into this LD 2003, so the state legislation that we have to conform to. So there's 3 components of this that we're working on, 2 of which we've already implemented. Those being density allotment, which allows up to 4 times the density, so that's already in our ordinance, and then the additional dwelling units. So both of those are a serious concern for us because of the short-term rentals. There currently are no parameters to restrict any short-term rentals, so if you wanted to take advantage of this density, you can do that and now create an additional short-term rental. The third component that we have to conform to is the affordable housing subdivision allotment. What that does is if you have 51% of your development at least, then you can have 2.5 times the density of whatever the zone currently is. So you can supersede that zone. We have to conform to this requirement, but we have to do that. So that's in the 80 to 120% AMI. 80% is the rental. So if we were to approve through the planning board review process for a rental affordable housing development, then they would have to be 80% of the AMI, or if they're going to design a subdivision and sell those lots, those units, they would have to be at the 120% AMI. So right now, what I'm trying to work out with our attorney is how do we enforce that? The selling of it, that's easy through the deed restrictions and whatnot. The rental aspect, that's going to be a little more complicated because we're going to have staff time involved in checking in on that. And then what do we do if they don't? Then that's a lawsuit. And that's going to get lengthy and that's going to get costly. So there's a little bit of diligence that we have to do on our end for that aspect. So that third part, we got a couple of planning board members that are here. They're working on this right now with me to implement that third aspect. So if all things go according to plan, then in June of '24, there'll be something on the ballot to vote on for that aspect. Hopefully, I mean, so right now the planning board, we're working on just this LD 2003. So in these conversations that the Economic Development Committee's having, the Select Board's having, if we can, put those integrated with it for June, then we will. But if not, then that might get pushed to November. But, we don't want to rush anything because we don't want to step on our toe and cause something to happen that we weren't intending to happen. But we also understand that now is the time to do it. Actually, last year was the time to do it. But, here
Well,
we
but the
are.
legislature did extend that time, so we're.
Well, that's not what I was meaning. I was just meaning, we need housing, and that's it. But yeah, the legislature, to comply with LD 2003, was July 1 of this year, and then they extended it because nobody could meet that requirement. So by July 1 of 2024, we have to be in conformance of LD 2003, and if we're not, pretty much we'll be in the races of who's going to fight it in the court system. So I don't want Rockport to waste any municipal funds and lawsuits that gets us tied up fighting something that the state is making us do because the state's not going to put any money into it. So that's that. I'd like us to have a strong sense of LD 2003 so we can defend ourselves if needed and make the housing that Rockport wants. And that's through the planning board and our ordinance efforts there. To speak a little bit about short-term rentals, we do have a program that's identified, that can identify short-term rentals through, so if you have a short-term rental and you put it on the web, I know where it's at. But we have approximately 150, and they're not all confirmed. And I know there's a few that exist that are not on this list, and they don't go through Airbnb and Vrbo. So they do a different program. Trying to get that data. I don't know if I'll ever get that data. But I know there's at least 150 that we have, probably more. How are we going to enforce that? I don't know if that's an enforcement thing. I don't know if that's a community taking a stance of how many are we going to allow. Like I know Bar Harbor, they put a limit on it, and if you're going to exceed that, then you have to replace it. So there's an interesting stance that some communities are taking about short-term rentals. Don't know what Rockport's really doing. We haven't really taken a stance. It's a community thing, so there's going to be a lot of conversations about that. And then infrastructure. So I talked a little bit about, the most complicated one is sewer of all the utilities, just because you got to dig up land and then you have pump stations and how's it going to get treated. So right now we have a split of, a portion goes to Camden, a portion goes to Rockland. Those are interlocal agreements that John can talk to more about if he wants to. But he said, I'm going to let you go, right? Yeah, and many of you know, some of you don't, but Camden has some infill and I&I issue, water I&I, so rainwater, when it rains, it gets into their system, and then that creates a capacity issue with their treatment plant. So when it doesn't rain, there's plenty of capacity. When it does rain, there's an issue. So we can't expand currently. We can't lay a new line. We can't really promote new development. We can't advertise Rockport on the system that goes to Camden. So it's an issue, it's a concern, it's an economic issue, it's a housing issue, it's an everything issue. We are considering looking at building our own plants. Where that's going to go, we're not quite sure, just to have it as an option. So hopefully we can work out something with Camden, but if not, we've got an option there. There's also another option of reverting everything and going to Rockland. But those are still two concerns of, we've got an interlocal agreement, it's going to cost money, and it'll never get cheaper. It'll only get more expensive. So if you're looking at it from that perspective of a developer, you're also looking at how much is it going to cost to operate this business? How much is it going to cost to operate these units? So if you've got an affordable housing unit, and you're looking at that third of those expenses, that's not just rent, it's utility costs too. So if we can't get it into that range that helps housing, then it's going to be very difficult for housing to come. So it's kind of where I'm at there. Yeah. So of the whole scenario, the easiest thing for the town to do is zoning changes. That's the simplest thing that we can do. Most complicated is
And internet.
utility. Yeah, yeah. So of all of the utilities, I include that as a utility. Of all the utilities, sewer is the most complicated. Fiber is definitely a necessity, but.
And we
Yes.
can have control over fiber, but we need to have more of a discussion on that, because that is important.
The designer part of my head says, I'd like to design it first and then see what it would take to have it be possible to build it.
Mm.
You know, there's a side of me, and I would just like to say, you hear all what you need, put together some different kinds of designs for the land, in our case, for the land that we have, that make it as dense as we'd like to make it from a design point of view. And then, if that was brought to the powers that be, that sit at this table, do you think we'd have a chance in hell of getting the laws rewritten so that we could actually do that? Obviously, you don't know what it is.
Well, in all honesty, so if you wanted to take that
Process
approach.
is one that's sort of, we want to get in it, you know, we need
No.
to get some things in front of us
Mhm.
and say, these think this would work.
So
We didn't like it.
I wouldn't discourage you from taking that approach, but how that approach would look is you're going to the planning board. You'd propose it to the planning board, saying, this is what you'd like to do on it, here's all your restrictions. Is there some way we can, propose an ordinance amendment? And that would be a solid approach.
That would be a what approach?
That would be a solid approach
That would be a solid approach.
to change the ordinance.
So the zoning codes and the building department codes would, under the circumstances, because there's such a need and such a demand.
Yeah, but for the codes, I'm not saying we could waive those. The ordinance itself, the land use ordinance, we can.
Zoning ordinance, we
zoning
can-
ordinance.
It comes if you're looking at manufactured housing or how to do some kind of different kind of way to provide shelter. Put that together, it may require the building codes to be looking at the most contemporary areas of the country that are doing the engineering on new kinds of structures. I mean, like laminated timbers or cross-laminated timbers or some of them. Any case.
Dominic,
I mean,
you
Yeah.
want to-
that's sort of on my horizon in thinking about, are we gonna try to do anything with this difficult piece of land? Would be, instead of waiting for all the codes to be written and then understanding what the codes will allow us to do and then trying to design something within that, it's like saying, let's try to think about making a set of living arrangements that are tight and dense and try to figure out as much as we can about ways we could possibly build it. And it goes everywhere from, manufactured housing goes everywhere from mobile home communities to,
Dominic wants to weigh in on this, so Dominic Cordisco.
Yeah, so don't know everybody here. Dominic Cordisco, I'm on the Economic Development Committee. And I'm part of the problem, to be quite honest, because I live in New York, come up here and I spend the summers here and I spend long weekends here. But I bought a house in 2019, which effectively makes it not available for someone that's going to live here year-round. But I'm a land use attorney in New York. And let me say, I am not an attorney in Maine. Nor do I have any desire to be an attorney in Maine. So I'm not saying anything that's legal, in that connection. But what I would suggest the select board consider in the near term is one of the things that various different options that were all discussed tonight, and all of them are valid and should be pursued to address this problem. But one of the things that the select board should consider is taking the uncertainty out of the process as far as zoning is concerned, because It's actually something that doesn't cost the taxpayers money to do here. But what you could do is to expand the town zoning regarding planned unit developments, where you give more certainty to developers to understand that when they propose a project, that they can go directly to the planning board, and if the planning board has, understands that there's merit to that project and it meets certain criteria, they can move forward without the need to go to the select board for a zoning amendment. Because in Maine, my understanding, limited understanding, is it's a fairly complicated process, because not only does it have to go to the select board, but then it has to go to the voters as well. And to get someone that is either owner of a parcel of land, or more likely a potential buyer for a parcel of land that's a developer, that is going to have to invest the money in the soft costs to develop a piece of property, and then if it needs a zoning amendment to take it through that process, you're looking at an incredible amount of time and effort and money to do that. And so at the Economic Development Committee, we've raised this before, but I would strongly advocate the select board to consider a zoning amendments for certain districts where water and sewer are either there or they could be there, where planned unit developments that give much greater density and flexibility to the planning board, and then you take the select board out of it. Just, for something to consider.
Yep, that's very helpful. All right, anybody else want to?
Yeah, just
Yeah,
one quick thing, and it's somewhat off of Dominic's point. I think this has been a great conversation. I've learned a great deal. And the one part about this that we haven't talked about are the other 3,600 people who will vote on some of those decisions. And this is I hope that this is, thankfully Jeff has been recording all of what we've said tonight. And I hope others in the community can get a chance to hear the messages we've heard from our employers, from the Economic Development Committee, those who have been working on this issue and have this immense amount of knowledge to share. But as we saw through those conversations about the RES property, I think we have a long way to go in terms of our community in understanding what is density, what is a pocket neighborhood, what, the issues that Sam raised, that's something that's familiar to me. I would like to have 3 acres and be able to build my own garage or my own shed, but that's a different conversation than perhaps in part, but not in total. So it's a different way. It's yet another reminder that everything that's happened since the pandemic is very different than what happened before. And affordability, I remember sitting on the select board in 2005, talking about affordability and how we're going to afford housing. Now we're 18 years later, and $500,000 homes is the starting point. Crisis doesn't even begin to cover the situation we find ourselves in with 43, kindergartners over at Crest. So I guess there's homework here. I think that's a great message, Dominic. I would ask all of you to keep talking with your neighbors and keep talking amongst those who you work with and talk to about what works and what doesn't work. Because while the 5 select board and staff are certainly working these issues slowly and on all these different levels, it's going to take a critical mass of our community to say, yes, we're gonna make this change in the ordinance. We're going to adopt these rules. I felt that we were ill-prepared, perhaps, in part for our conversations. We talked about RES and what housing meant. We can't afford to look the other way now, clearly, right? And we couldn't look the other way then. But if this doesn't give you enough oomph in your step to want to talk about these issues amongst your community, I hope this did it because we need help. And I think the board wants your feedback. I want your feedback. Orion wants your feedback. If there's other thoughts, ideas, our doors are open always, and we want to be putting things together and helping to solve issues and not impediments to them. So
Great, thanks, John. And I see the Economic Development Committee as being sort of the vehicle to have more of these sort of detailed discussions about what it looks like to come up with some of these models that maybe do get sort of pre-approved to cut down on the uncertainty and time for developers. But of course, we're all available as well, and I think it is something that matters to our community and to what we want our community to be. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time. It's a weeknight, and appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Holy cow.